Reaperman here with Virtua Racing on Sega Saturn, or by its more annoying proper title, Time Warner Interactive's VR Virtua Racing. That's right, it's a Sega arcade racer that's not even made by Sega. So, a short while ago, while I was recording some 32X footage of Virtua Racing Deluxe, I mentioned that the 32X version was only my second favorite Virtua Racing game, and that my absolute favorite was the Saturn version, which everybody else seems to hate on these days. Today I'm going to flesh that comment out a bit and attempt to explain why it's not only my favorite Virtual Racing game, but also my favorite Saturn racer, also why it's in my top 5 Saturn games, maybe even number 1, and it's the Saturn game that I have the most total time playing, over 16 hours of which was played for this review alone. Time Warner Interactive's VR Virtual Racing, which will be referred to from this point forward as Quiverver, it's a darn good game, but it's easily misunderstood and in some ways flawed. I do see where folks these days are coming from on it. I shared that opinion too for the first few times I played it, and I think it shows some definite signs that it was a bit rushed to market. For example, there seems to be some remnants of ideas intended early on that were partially dropped and potentially as it was just bundled together and rushed off. So, Quiverver was not quite a Saturn launch title, and the internet seems a bit iffy on its actual release date, but it was within the first 6 months of the console's life, and it beat Sega Rally to market. So it's a pretty early time. Maybe someday I'll do a video on the crazy Saturn launch and the even crazier console generation up to that point, but I digress. For some Virtual Racing series backstory, when it came out originally in arcades and on Sega Genesis, it had just one car and 3 tracks. The deluxe version on 32X had all of that with a couple new cars and tracks added to the mix, and all was selectable from the start menu. But Quiverver did something else. It had an arcade mode right there at the top of their menu, and it was sitting there looking like the star of the show, but it was pure in that it only had what the arcade did, 1 car, 3 tracks. I checked the manual and the FAQ. There seems to be no hidden or unlockable items in this mode. Arcade mode was literally that. What was in the arcade? No more. Sure, the Saturn's frame count was still way down on the arcade, but it was still higher than previous home incarnations. AI quality was also down from other versions, and it seems a bit easier to get to the front of the pack, but slightly harder to make the checkpoint time limits. Let's compare it to its primary competitor in the series. 32X Virtual Racing is on the left, while Saturn is on the right. When compared, 32X is no slouch at all. Graphically, the Genesis SCART output seems considerably sharper than Saturn's, which helps that version out immensely. After that, Quiverver features more detailed models and some trackside objects totally missing from the Genesis version. It's only a slight upgrade in appearance though. Truthfully, players have to look way too hard to spot the differences, and when the sharpness difference is added in, it's kind of a wash. But this is what most Saturn racers look like. Sega Rally came out about the same time, also an early title, and it really shows off what racing in this generation was about. Rich textures, still quite a smooth frame rate, and only slightly shorter draw distance. There are no 16-car grids in Sega Rally, which may explain some of the differences, but looking at them, there's little question which game looked better. But this was just arcade mode, and the first few times I played Virtual Racing on Saturn, I assumed that arcade mode was the meat of the Saturn version, as it had been in the past, and I was mistaken. This is not what makes Quiverver great. Actually, if arcade mode was all there was, this game would be terrible. But right below that narrowly focused arcade experience, Time Warner stapled on a much bigger and better game, the Grand Prix mode. This was a true career progression, starting with go-karts and moving through vehicles, 5 different ones in total, and finishing up with the standard F1 car. Track count rose from 3 to 10, keeping the 3 original tracks, dumping the extras from the deluxe version, and adding 7 new courses. Grand Prix mode races were also twice as long at 10 laps versus 5 in arcade mode, and this created a very different gameplay vibe. In some classes, the player is out there for 10 plus minutes per race. That's enough time to cover 3 full games of Sega Rally. Not just 3 races, but enough to get 3 full games with 3 tracks each in. There's a whole lot of racing to be done in Twiverver, and it is glorious. The closest comparison I can make is the Game Boy Donkey Kong. First players are introduced to slightly odd renditions of the familiar few arcade levels, and after that the tone completely changes and the real game starts. The Grand Prix mode is largely carried by its replay value, but gameplay is no slouch either. Cars handle very differently from each other. Granted, they don't handle realistically by today's standards, but the physics are largely predictable and very rewarding, which checks all the right boxes for arcade racing. AI is also better than it is in arcade mode, in that they don't seem to fly off the track or get stuck on trackside objects. But they're not too bright, and the only one avoiding accidents in this game is going to be the player. This is pretty standard for the time, but know that going in. As with previous Virtua Racing games, harder collisions are handled with canned spin-out animations. And those kind of just provide the right note of infuriating motivation to pass cleanly next time. Twiverver does a good job of making the race results feel related to the player's skill. The game neither punishes skill nor rewards mediocrity. Virtua Racing has historically leaned a little more simulation than most Sega arcade racers, especially the ones during the Saturn era. This time, Time Warner really took that to another level. There is a third mode in Twiverver, a practice mode, that very nearly becomes the best part of the game. Unlike Grand Prix mode, practice mode allows players to play any car on any track with options like lap count and drones on or off. Unfortunately, it stopped short of being a full free race feature by limiting the drone count to 3, rather than the full grid of 15 drones. And this kind of leaves the player wanting more. It's pretty lonely out there. Looking back on it, I'd rather this was the typical free race mode with items unlocked from the career mode, and that's a feature that would become very common in racing games over the next few years. The reason practice mode is so disappointing is that from the career mode, if the player advances past a certain racing class, they can no longer go back and drive that vehicle in that career. Likewise, if they complete a track at any racing class, they can no longer race that track until they advance to the next class. I see why they did this, as eliminating tracks as they're raced creates a feeling of tension in the career mode. It's possible, indeed it's pretty likely, that the player will get into an unwinnable situation at some point and have to restart or reload their career. This is fairly unique to Twiverver, and certainly not something we see anywhere today. Every racing class has a certain point target. Finishing in the top 6 earns a varying number of points. This point target increases with each class, and when it's reached, players are given the option of graduating to the next class or finishing up the remaining races at their current class. As they climb through the classes, the point target increases, but the number of possible races, 10 per class, stays the same. Where third place finishes are enough to get through early classes, that goes away quickly. I tend to like setting the difficulty to where I don't come in first, so I can barely make the prototype racing class. So there we have the 3 game modes in the menu, and none of them offer access to everything. They all offer limits to the full experience in some way. To get around much of that problem, I highly recommend taking full advantage of the Grand Prix mode's 5 save slots. Every time a career graduation happens, just drop a fresh save with the name of the car so racing can resume at all unlocked levels with all available tracks. Now let's talk a bit about those tracks and some of the oddities around them. The new tracks are great in my opinion, and even surpass the originals. Each of them is complete with checkpoints and pits, which would only be used in arcade mode's pit starts. This game features no endurance racing, so while players can pit, there's no compelling reason to do so. I think the checkpoints and pit stops are a suggestion that maybe at some point a more complete arcade mode was planned. Of the 7 new tracks, 2 are variants of each other's. Surfer Speedway offers an oval course and one that includes a bit of infield. However, many, if not all, of the new tracks contain what appear to be places where alternate routes could happen. Have a look at Amazon Raceway here. Just after the first checkpoint, the road splits and is blocked off. But unlike other tracks, we can still clip through these last 2 segments of wall. I've heard this described as a shortcut, but I don't think so. From the start, Virtua Racing has always kind of rocked an overwhelmingly triangular aesthetic to its large polygons. But these uniformly sized quads in the tunnel look to me to be the way a level would be roughed out on Saturn. Saturn is well known for its ability to accelerate quads. I don't think it's going too far to say that this was supposed to be a track variant at some point, but either time ran out or the idea was abandoned. Kind of a shame. It would have been a great variant for the go-kart class. Makes me really want to take a closer look at the other track models. For vehicles and their handling, players will quickly form their favorites and least favorites, much like with the tracks. They vary in top speed, acceleration, turning ability, grip, perceived weight, and ease of oversteer. I'm sure a few of those stats are bundled together, but there's no good source of information on the handling model to check. I gravitate to the F-160, which is the ugliest car by quite a bit. It's light and it's quick, and it provides just the right amount of lift-off oversteer in my opinion. My second favorite is the go-kart, which is so slow that it makes for some real strategic thinking and close racing. The car I don't like is the prototype racer. It's the fastest in the game, but it's slow to accelerate and feels very heavy. So we've mentioned modes, handling, tracks, and cars. Moving on to the audio, it's largely unchanged from previous incarnations. Engine and tire sounds are pretty much what they were. For music, Twoverver maintains the tradition of playing only little jingles at the checkpoints. This time around, Saturn uses CD audio for these, and the quality boost is noticeable for the duration of those few seconds. On the new tracks, checkpoints can be actually pretty far apart. That leaves it a bit more quiet than previous titles, especially in the slower classes. It all makes sense, though I'd prefer to have had the option of a full musical score, and it's not like the CD was hurting for room. The disc isn't storing a ton of textures or video. I'm surprised that the game takes up as much space as it does. Now, the races do all start off with an intro jingle unique to the course, and I really like the new ones. So, that's Saturn's Virtua Racing. It's seen by many these days not just as a bad game, but as the worst game ever. At the time, though, it received generally positive reviews with a few really low and a few really high scores. Because of that, I don't think it qualifies as a hidden gem. Perhaps a better term is forgotten gem. I think that when today's gamer looks backwards, they have the benefit of seeing Saturn's full and excellent arcade racing library. And with so much to choose from, why spend enough time with the ugly one to discover the excellent Grand Prix mode? So what do you think of Virtua Racing? Feel free to share some memories. Reaperman out.